All right, all set.
All right, thanks so much. So actually, before we get started, I know, Maggie, that you and John have experience with Hypothesis. For other attendees, do you mind just giving me a brief intro of what you teach and if you have used Hypothesis before?
Sure.
Sure. Hi. I've been using Hypothesis pretty regularly for several years now, and I teach in the biology department, and I teach ecology courses. And let's see what else. When I use Hypothesis, I've primarily been using it to comment on news-related articles related to our coursework and also scientific papers.
Awesome, thanks. That's helpful to know. Scott, have you
Yeah,
used Hypothesis before as well?
I have never used it. I'm just learning more information about AI, but I am an EOP counselor here at SUNY Oswego, so I'm more like an advisor. I have taught a
Okay.
math section and first generation or first year programs in the past
Okay,
and transfer seminars.
awesome. All right, great. Just a helpful context to kind of know like how in depth to get into explaining, the tool and the capabilities and things like that. So let me just pull up one last thing and then we will get going.
One thing I'll just add is I don't mind hearing about the capabilities because I have a feeling I'm not using it all the capabilities I could be. So whatever you want to share will be useful.
Awesome. Good to know. All right, so I will pop the link to the slides in the chat because there are some resources linked in the slides throughout. So today I'll be talking about social annotation through like the lens of AI. And I try to kind of approach things from a more neutral stance of, I know some people want to avoid their, having their students turn to AI. Some people might want to incorporate AI into their teaching or at least talk about AI from an information literacy standpoint. So I'm going to try and tie all those things in, which is a tall order for a 50-minute session, but we'll see how things go. So I'll start with just kind of going quickly over just like essentially what AI is really doing and what Hypothesis is to have that foundational knowledge of like, what are we talking about here? I'll talk about how we can frame Hypothesis social annotation assignments and perhaps approach those assignments in a way to encourage or discourage AI use, like, meet the goals that we have for AI in our classes. And then I'll go over how it can be set up in Brightspace as well. So obviously we're a small group, and if you have questions, please feel free to either pop them into the Zoom chat or just unmute and ask. We don't have to wait until like the end or anything like that. And if you, Maggie, John, anyone want to share your experiences, please feel free to do that as well. So my name is Christie. I'm with the Hypothesis team, and I run our trainings here and work largely with faculty across the country on how to use Hypothesis in their courses. I also adjunct a course and I use Hypothesis in my own course. So I was teaching in the past spring and have kind of like gone through this evolution of like, seeing students like experimenting with AI and trying to work with it in my own course as well. So I'll kind of inject some of my own experiences in there through the session. The first thing I want to kind of bring up is just a quick review of what large language models like ChatGPT are really doing at the root of things, because I think a lot of people turn to AI and act like it's a search engine or a Wikipedia entry or something like that. And large language models don't have actual knowledge of things. So the kind of the basic rundown of how they work is that they are like predictive text on steroids, essentially. ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and all these different AI tools that exist out there have ingested lots and lots of data, and they're basically just going through a process of predicting what is the most likely next word or phrase or sentence to occur after, this, based on all this data that we have. So our brains kind of do this too, for folks that were raised in the United States. If I say the words twinkle, twinkle, little, you might fill in the last word with star because you're, familiar with that tune. But that's essentially kind of what ChatGPT is doing. And because of that, large language models can often, make up information since it doesn't know information. And it will also not give consistent responses. So you can ask the same question of a large language model more than once, and it will give you a different response each time. So one time I asked ChatGPT if New Jersey had any female governors, and it told me no, which is incorrect. And then I asked it again, and it got it right the next time. So it is kind of not as consistent. Some people compare it to like a calculator. It's not as consistent as a calculator would be, just because of the way that these work. So I mentioned some of these, some kind of opportunities and limitations of large language models tending to invent information, because of citing specific quotes or examples can be problematic. So if you ask a large language model for a specific quote from a book, sometimes it will give you a quote that's correct and exists. Sometimes it will give you a quote that looks like it's correct, but it doesn't actually exist in that book. So it's just something to be aware of. And I think something, as educators, we have an opportunity to teach our students to be aware of as well, because it will always look like it knows what it's talking about, right? It's just going to spit out answers, and it's not, going to tell us like, oh, this might be invented, but it can be. And but there are some ways it can be useful as well. So you can engage in a dialogue with it. So I've had situations where like I'll be writing an email draft and I feel like the tone is a little awkward. So I'll ask ChatGPT like, oh, can you make this sound like a little bit more engaging? And then it'll give me a new response. I'm like, that sounds a little too casual. Can we make it more professional? And you can kind of go back and forth with it. So there are some situations where it can be more helpful when you're not relying on it for information. Yeah, but this is all kind of, I left a little note here that I'm making very large generalizations because there are so many AI tools and so many things that are changing every day that it is kind of difficult to be like, this is how they all kind of work. But I think at this point, this is the best kind of foundation we can have moving forward. Just being aware that they're not reliable sources of information. So why might our students turn to large language models like ChatGPT for coursework? I think this is helpful to think about, because it can help inform us how to change our practices to avoid it if we don't want our students to be using ChatGPT. And I think a lot of the times that I've seen students turn to AI, or I've been, suspicious of thinking students are turning to AI when I don't necessarily want them to, is when they haven't been keeping up with the work because of the demands of, their academic life, of their work life, of their family life. They're feeling under pressure of deadlines, and, they feel like they need a quick solution. So I kind of in my heart of hearts think that students for the most part, don't want to do things that are, not meeting our academic integrity standards, but sometimes feel like they have to because they're not sure of where to turn, or they feel like you know, if they don't turn something in, they're going to get a failing grade or things like that. So those are the kinds of things that inform how I tend to approach my social annotation assignments with AI in mind. So how does social annotation tie into all of this? First, I want to just go over what hypothesis social annotation looks like, since not everybody here is familiar with it. Basically, hypothesis lets you take a document that you've added into your Brightspace course, and it adds a, I've like zoomed into this very largely apparently. It adds a annotation sidebar to the right-hand side of the document, where students and the instructor can have a conversation about the text as they read. So you might notice a couple things here. On the left, there are areas of the text that are highlighted, and those areas of text are areas that students or me as the instructor have selected to annotate. So those are quoted on the right-hand side in the annotations. And if I hover over each annotation, you can see that the text on the left changes color, so you can see exactly what kind of word or phrase or sentence the student is discussing. Or if I'm asking, you know, the students a question, they can see what I'm referencing in the text. You also may notice that some of these annotations have the ability to show replies. So when I click on the show reply option, it expands into a threaded discussion. And that threaded discussion allows students to have a specific conversation around a specific piece of text. So in this case, Jennifer is talking about a very specific equation, and Malik is asking a question about that. And then later on, they can be talking about something completely different. So it has similarities to a traditional discussion board in the learning management system, but I like to see hypothesis as being a little bit more student-driven in the conversations and a little bit more authentic in the conversations, because they can reference the text as they're completing the course readings. And we like to say at hypothesis that it makes reading more active, visible, and social, and that leads to you know, greater student retention of course content and material and comprehension of that material. It can also be helpful for us as instructors, because we can see exactly where students are having trouble with text. So if they have questions, we can see their questions that they're thinking about as they're reading. And it makes reading more social, because students can see what their classmates are writing about the text as well. So I think it can really help encourage students to engage in this reflective, like, metacognition in a way that they might not do otherwise, because if we're asking them to annotate on a document, we have to ask them to think about, you know, what questions do I have? How is this connected to what I've learned before? How is this connected to current events? And they have to think about those things in order to add the annotations. And the social aspect is what I hear from my students as being their favorite part of the tool. Being able to see what their classmates are saying about the reading helps them better understand those interpretations and what the content is. They get to kind of see different perspectives and different ways of describing the content. So before I move on, I know I kind of did a brief, I don't know why my PDF kind of disappeared here. A brief overview of what hypothesis is here. I'll get into some of the more technical details later on, but are there any questions so far about anything that I have talked about? Okay.
I'm all set.
Thanks. Awesome. So with looking at hypothesis through the angle of AI, I think that consistently using social annotation can help us with AI in our courses in 3 ways in particular. First, it emphasizes the learning process over just the final product of learning. Second, it encourages continued student engagement throughout the course, and it also helps cultivate the student voice. And I'll kind of dive into each of these a little bit more. So the idea of emphasizing process over product. Oftentimes in our courses, we have large summative assessments like exams or research papers that are worth a large percentage of the grade. And that is oftentimes where we see students turning to places we might not want them to complete these assignments because they feel the pressure of that final product. But learning is oftentimes really messy, right? You make mistakes along the way. You don't know things, the first time around. You might have some misconceptions as you're reading or as you're learning. And hypothesis gives us space to have that learning process, be visible, and have some credit for the process of learning, right? So I kind of am explicit with my students in my syllabus in that I want them to not worry about their annotations to necessarily be correct as they're reading. I want them to show me what they're thinking as they're reading, because learning is messy and I want to see what their thought process is so that we can course correct if we need to. So trying to emphasize that whole idea of learning as a process over just a final product can be helpful. And I give my students kind of participation credit for their annotations. Again, not worrying about if their annotations say correct things, but just trying to make that way of thinking more visible. Encouraging continued engagement is also really important in keeping students' retention and success high. So having students annotate readings regularly throughout the course can make sure that students are logging into your course and looking at the readings, even if it's only briefly. So making sure that students are keeping up with that content will better prepare them for those more summative assessments. And then finally, the idea of cultivating student voice. I think using hypothesis can help students feel like they have more agency and identify as scholars in learning. So I think sometimes the way that K-12 education prepares students, learning is often seen as passive, right? Students are like these vessels where they receive information, and they don't challenge texts necessarily or push back on, who's seen as the authority on information. Hypothesis kind of gives students space to do that. They can question the course text. They can engage with it in a way where they don't necessarily have to just take the ideas at face value. And I think developing that identity as a scholar, as someone who is participating actively in the course, is important in building student confidence and self-efficacy, again, for when they get to those exams and those essays and those larger course assignments later on. And we actually do have a case study. Let me see if I can kind of quickly bring it up. That an undergrad pharmacy instructor used hypothesis in his courses, and he found that it increased students' science identity across demographics. So in underrepresented groups and first-generation students, he saw not only greater comprehension of the text, but students were more likely to persist in the sciences because they saw themselves as scientists. So I think that is a really interesting way to look at using the tool as well and encouraging students to, look at themselves as they're engaging with the course text. So I'll pop this case study into the chat because I don't think this is in the slides, sorry. And I think he's publishing, this is on our website, but I do think this is going through the peer review process to be published as well. So what does this look like in practice? How can we get our students to engage with our course readings or increase AI literacy, all these different things I'm going to try to kind of throw in here. I think just using annotation as formative assessment frequently in the course can be a helpful way to approach things. So again, emphasizing that learning process. In my own course, I have my students annotate at least one reading a week. Sometimes they're doing it more than one reading every week. And I think the way that we frame our annotation instructions can also impact the quality of the annotations that students have and the level of depth in the conversation that they're getting. So I have this linked later on in the slide deck, but I really like to think about, and this is something that kind of came up for me a lot this past semester, how can I make students make connections, not just summarize what they're reading? So that's kind of where I would see if students weren't digging in a specific way, if I was not clear with them that I wanted them to ask a question, connect something in the text to their own life, comment on a passage or idea and explain how it brought in challenge or changed their way of thinking. Like making explicit, meaningful connections was how I got the most authentic engagement from readings. If students sounded like they were using AI to annotate, usually it was just some kind of summary. And in that case, I would tell the students, I don't want a summary for your annotation. You need to show me some kind of connection, whether that's to another reading in the course, to something in your life, to something you've learned from another course. I had one professor that I worked with that was actually an ecology professor, I think in Massachusetts maybe, who had her student, she taught like a ecology course that was for non-majors. So in every hypothesis assignment, her students had to find a way to connect the article to their major, like find an outside resource and link that. So any way that we can have our students make these deeper connections will have them engaging with the course text in a way that maybe they're not going to AI. Maybe there are some instances where going to AI is okay and we can be explicit with them in that. So if there are cases where students are not sure about a definition of a word in the text, maybe that's something that's like, okay, hop over to ChatGPT and see how they explain it. And then, you know, tell me in your annotation, I used ChatGPT to figure out what this word meant. And here's what it said. So I think, again, it's how we frame things for our students and how we approach the assignments for when it might be appropriate to use AI and when we want them to use their own brains to show us their thinking process. I also think it can be helpful to consider incorporating the annotations themselves into summative assessments. So that kind of ensures that students are seeing each other as scholars within the course, which I kind of talked about a little bit before. And bringing that community in summative assessments also ensures that students are using your course content, referencing what's happening in our courses and not relying on AI tools to generate their course content. So for example, in my own course, I have usually with any like project or summative assessment, my students will submit a reflection afterwards to, you know, tell me how they felt about the assignment, like would they change how they approached it? What did they do that made them successful? And I'll ask them how their classmates' annotations influence them or how their own annotations changed throughout the course. So I'll have them kind of go back and reflect on that annotation activity and become part of the assessment strategy. And then finally, I really like the idea of having students critique AI-generated text using hypothesis. So I worked with a biology professor who actually had one of the prompts that she normally has her students answer. She asked ChatGPT to answer it, and she gave it to her students as a hypothesis assignment and was like, if a student gave this to me, I would give it a 6 out of 10. Annotate this and improve it to make it a 10 out of 10. So they are kind of taking something that AI has generated and seeing where maybe its weaknesses are, where its strengths are, and how they can improve upon what has been created by AI. So that could encourage more critical thinking about what AI is generated, and kind of flip an assignment on its head. So I thought that was an interesting idea as well. So we have some ideas for AI assignments on our website. They're linked in the slides here. So if you do want students to critique AI outputs, there are some examples of instructions you can use in your course. So if you want students to fact check AI, there are instructions there. You can have them act as content experts. So there are certain ways you can use AI. Like for example, I can go to ChatGPT and ask it, can you write about pedagogy, like this aspect of pedagogy from the perspective of Marzano or something like that. Like you can give them a specific theorist and see, can they write from that perspective? And then have students critique, was AI accurate in doing that? Does that meet that theorist's actual like perspective of things? So there are kind of different ways that you can have students approach that text, or just, you know, is ChatGPT a good writer? So how would you improve its writing, whether it's beyond the fact checking or the content, just the stylistic aspects of that. So those examples are linked in the deck. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we also just have general annotation assignment examples. So that is what I tend to hear most frequently from faculty, is that they setting up a hypothesis-enabled reading in their course is not super difficult, but getting students to engage in that meaningful conversation can sometimes take a little bit of practice. So we have these sample assignments on the site, and you can use the prompts here or adapt them for your course. So again, I would really focus on this idea of trying to get students to make connections to other readings in the course, to things that they've learned in other courses throughout their time or outside resources, in order to create those deeper conversations. All right, so the last piece here, I'll go through how you can set up hypothesis in Brightspace. Any questions or thoughts at this point?
I'm all set right now.
Awesome. All right, so the way that hypothesis works in Brightspace is that students are signed automatically in. It is deeply integrated into the Brightspace course. So when you click on a reading that has hypothesis enabled on it, the sidebar will automatically show up, and the students will be signed in. So for the students, it doesn't really seem like they're going to an external tool. They don't really have to like log into a separate website or anything like that. For instructors, you can set up your hypothesis enabled readings in Brightspace, and you can also do your grading within Brightspace as well. So everything is still kind of being done within the learning management system. And your grading, the one thing we have recently updated in our grading capabilities in Brightspace, so this might be new for some folks. Now, it used to be that the grading bar at the top here would only show the grade as out of 10, no matter what you made the point value of the assignment. But it should now accurately reflect the point value of the assignment and hypothesis. So if you make a hypothesis and you're able to reading 20 points, it'll show out of 20. And we've also added this ability to give private feedback to students as you enter grades. So when you're grading students in hypothesis, you can pull the student, select the student from the drop-down menu here. You can enter a score. And now, again, there's this little feedback option where you can enter private feedback for students, and the student would see that in their grade book. So this is where I tend to like nudge students if they're summarizing in their annotations and I want them to go a little bit further than that. I'll kind of nudge them in the private feedback in the first couple weeks of class. And then they tend to kind of catch on after maybe like the third week or something like that. So we talked about grading. Another piece of the Brightspace integration is that you can have students annotate in small groups. So the default setting is that everyone in the class can annotate or together or see each other's annotations, but some people don't necessarily want all of the students to be annotating together. So you can break students up into groups of 5 or 10 or whatever makes the most sense for your class using the Brightspace group sets, and that will create small group annotation spaces for each of those groups. So there are fewer students annotating on the document together. As far as what you can annotate, most folks, hypothesis works best with texts that are freely available to students online, PDFs that you can load into your Brightspace course, websites and articles that are public facing so that if they don't have a paywall on them, any open textbooks in OER. The one kind of exception to that rule is JSTOR articles. So we do have an integration with JSTOR. If you have students reading any articles in JSTOR, you can use the URL from that JSTOR article to have them annotate without having to be redirected to the library website, which is kind of nice. And then more recently, we've added the ability to annotate YouTube video transcripts. So that is kind of beyond the traditional document, but if you do want students to annotate a YouTube video as they're watching it, they can watch the video and annotate the transcript as they watch, as long as the video is on YouTube. But it can be an unlisted video. It doesn't necessarily have to be like publicly available. And then on the other side of things, you can put different types of media into annotations as well. So I think a lot of people tend to lean on text as the main mode of annotation, but there is a lot of power in the multimodality or the multimodal possibilities, I guess I should say, of annotation. So students or yourself can add videos to add greater context, embed images into annotations, add external links and tags, or use LaTeX to add equations to annotations. So there was this one communications professor in Washington who mentioned recently that if she wants to reuse articles that are generally good, but like somewhat outdated, sometimes she'll add images that have updated graphs or updated statistics showing more recent statistics from articles. So I think that could be a useful way to embed content or to have students bring in related content that helps them understand concepts better. So my students did that. Sometimes they would bring in like link to YouTube videos that they were like, oh, I didn't really understand what this was talking about. Here's this YouTube video that helped me understand it better. And then one thing to note before I go into Brightspace is that if you are using a PDF with hypothesis, it does have to have a selectable text layer on it so that you can like highlight the text in order to add an annotation. So basically what that means is if you open a PDF on your computer, you need to be able to copy and paste text from it. if you're not able to do that, then Hypothesis also won't see text on it. And we have a link on the slide here that enables you to add the text layer to the PDF. So I'll walk through how to add a document, a hypothesis-enabled reading to your Brightspace course, and how to annotate that. But the resources are in the slide deck as well for reference a little bit later on. John, I just wanted to check really quickly. We haven't been able to get this updated at Oswego yet, right? With the new, okay. I see
We've
it,
been
Maggie.
asking for that to be done since January. I don't believe it has been yet, though.
Okay,
No.
that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure before I was diving into how to do it, because then
We
the
were
how to do it
promised
would
it
be
would be
different.
done. We were promised it would be done before this workshop, but
But it was
it
not.
doesn't look like that happened.
Okay, not an issue either way. So what you would want to do is go into your Brightspace course and find the module where you want to add your hypothesis-enabled reading. And then you would go to existing activities and choose external learning tools from the existing activities menu. At this point, you would always scroll down and click create new LTI link. Even if you already have articles with hypothesis here, you always want to hit this new create LTI link, or else it'll just overwrite old assignments. So we're going to create new LTI link here. I'll put in the title of my reading. And then this LTI URL, this is something, and then the newer processes is a little bit easier. We have to have this one URL handy to copy and paste into our Brightspace course. And that is linked in the deck. But once we're able to upgrade as we go to the new process, you won't have to worry about this URL anymore. But I'm going to paste that here and then click create and insert. And that will add my kind of shell for the assignment to my module in Brightspace. Now, when I click on the assignment itself, it will give me the different options from where I can grab a file. So I have a few different options here. I can copy and paste a URL from the web or from YouTube. I can grab a PDF from my Google Drive or OneDrive. I can copy a URL from JSTOR, or if I've uploaded a file into one of my D2L modules, I can grab a file from there as well. I'm going to choose Google Drive and upload a file I have on my computer there. So I have the option to use files that I already have here, or I can upload a file from my computer, which is what I'm going to do. And then at this point, if I did want to make this a group assignment so that smaller groups were annotating together, I can select this option and choose a group set from my Brightspace course site. But if I want everyone in the class to be able to see each other's annotations, I would leave it blank. So the default, again, leaving this blank, is everyone can see each other's annotations, can click continue. And then my reading has been added and it is ready to be annotated. So if I wanted to add an annotation, all I have to do is select the text I'd like to annotate and click that annotate button that shows up there. And post that. So a few steps and we are ready to go. And then once my students have annotated, they'll start to populate in this drop-down menu here, and I can start adding their grades there as well. So the instructions again are linked here, as well as this video, which reviews that process that I just went through. Is there anything that would be helpful to review about that Brightspace integration, or does anyone want to see like a different file type or something like that? Or any other questions?
I'm okay.
I think
But thank you.
All right, yeah, the technical stuff for hypothesis tends to be pretty straightforward, which is nice.
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to kind of bring up as we wrap up for the final bit today is when we're having students use AI, and we didn't really talk about having students go to AI for things, but if you do, you know, talk to them about using it for brainstorming or using it for, you know, defining things in annotation, things like that. We just mentioned the whole idea of data security and their data being used as training data. I think this is just something to, you know, always bring up with students, that if they're using a free product, then they are the product, right? So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. Additionally, sometimes AI is the access levels can be different for different students. So some students might pay to have access to a really good AI model, and some students might not have the financial ability to do that. Then there were days like the other day, like all these AI models suddenly like went down. So our ability to like rely on AI models for assignments could be spotty, or could contain some access issues. So there's an article linked on this slide that kind of has a good way to approach this and explore it with students. So I've linked that if that's something you ever would like to talk about with your students, as well as some other articles as well. And then the last kind of bits I have are just how you can learn more about hypothesis. So you can find specific examples of assignments in different disciplines on our website here. So I know like we have some biology assignments that are listed that have been submitted by faculty across North America. So some faculty have submitted assignments for our resource repository if you'd like more ideas. Our support team emails here as well. We also offer something called Hypothesis Academy. In addition to these synchronous trainings, we do asynchronous workshops that are 2 weeks long. So we have 2 topics right now: Social Annotation 101 and Social Annotation in the Age of AI. So the AI one, we kind of just do like this expanded version of what we were talking about today, and think about how we can develop annotation assignments with that, and we annotate different articles around it and stuff. So I'll link that in the chat, just because a cohort of the Social Annotation in the Age of AI just launched yesterday. So if you still want to join that, you can register for it, and I will sneak you in if you want to join this 2-week cohort. So no synchronous meeting, it's just kind of completing the work over the 2 weeks, and you get like a badge at the end of it. And then we typically have, during the school year, we have weekly partner workshops. This summer, we're going to be doing 2 different workshop series. And these are more like synchronous Zoom sessions. So if you're interested in different topics, next week, our focus is on social annotation for student retention and success. And then in July and August, we're kind of doing more like just getting started annotation assignment ideas, things like that. So that is linked on this slide as well. And then my email is here. I'm always happy to brainstorm with folks on how they might use annotations, or like redesign their annotation assignments, or use them in creative ways. So please feel free to reach out if there's anything I can help answer for you. But that is everything I have for today. Any like questions or thoughts out there for me?
No, but thank you so much for
Yes,
this.
thank you. This was good.
Awesome.
I do have a maybe one or two questions. I'm just curious about how within your course structure or your impressions of how others use hypothesis, how much are they weighting hypothesis assignments within course grades for classes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that kind of varies very widely. I have it as hypothesis is like my participation grade, and it's about 20% of my course grade. So, and I grade my assignments as complete or incomplete. So they either are getting full credit or no credit. But just because they've annotated doesn't mean they'll receive the complete. In my case, like I said, if they do something like they just summarize, they aren't actually following like the instructions for annotations, I'll still give them an incomplete and ask them to like revise or something like that. So that's how I personally handle it. I don't know if Maggie or John have any input from their own experiences or from folks they've worked with.
It varies with course learning objectives and how much of it is accomplished by this task and so forth. You know, for me, it's a fairly small share. It varies when I'm having them give peer feedback on writing from other people. It's a bit heavier than when I'm having them participate in the discussion, for example, using hypothesis. So it depends.
That's always the answer, right? It's like the worst answer,
Yes.
but it's always the answer.
My main issue, I guess you could say, is and maybe this is just a commentary on my teaching or all. I have trouble maintaining the quality of the discussions and the content of them. I give the students a rubric that shows high, intermediate, and low quality responses. And I was pleased to hear you talking about the emphasis on connection. So that's always the highest quality response is one that has connections to previous course material in our class or connections to other classes that students have taken at Oswego. But I still find that the majority of the class just it doesn't really engage at the level I would like to with their responses. And there's always a few students that do a great job, and they're the students that find their voice, but the other students don't seem to engage with the hypothesis opportunity as much, except to kind of check off the box that says, all right, I logged on, I participated, and I'm not really concerned whether my response is high or low quality. And then if I don't have it weighted highly in the course, then I find myself spending a lot of time dealing with low quality interactions that are often submitted at the last minute. And so it's just, I don't know, I just really struggle. And I've talked to John about this in the past, and I just struggle with it.
Yeah, I think that it can be a common struggle. I have to say, I invest a lot of time early on in the semester giving the students the private feedback for how their annotations could like get deeper. And like I mentioned, I'll give them the 0 for the assignment and say like I'll offer them the ability to add new annotations or revise their annotations. So it kind of pushes them a little bit in the beginning. And it is more work on my end because of that. But then after I think like the third, fourth week of the term, then they tend to have a better sense of what is going to get them the full points for the assignment and what would be like a more engaging discussion. I also heard from a professor who said that she started to highlight like each week she would either like send an announcement out or she would, you know, bring it up in class, like an exemplar annotation from the reading. And that kind of created motivation amongst her students. Like she said, she started getting messages from her students that would be like, don't forget to like look at my annotation this week for the hypothesis highlight of the week or something. So that's not something I have tried in my class, but I might also do that to make sure that students are seeing their peers' examples that are meeting that criteria as well, because I think just being able to reinforce the idea of what quality annotations is, that repetition sometimes is needed. So I don't know if that's helpful at all.
No, it is. I had never thought of the highlight of the week. I have not done that. And that would be a good way to, well, like you said, bring attention to quality contribution so that hopefully the class as a whole might feel, might want to up their game a little bit.
Yeah.
Have you, one thing I've toyed with, but I have not tried is do you have any experience or know anyone who's used hypothesis sort of like in real time in the class to try to generate, like with small groups, more interesting feedback about the reading and then use that as a jumping off point for class discussion? Do you have any experience with that idea?
So I think a lot of folks I know will have students annotate before a class and then use the annotations as that jumping off point. I have heard of people having the students do it in class as well. The only thing I guess I would be concerned about in that case is just different student like processing speed and reading speed, and trying to be equitable around that. I think it could be interesting to possibly have students annotate in small groups before class. If they have access to devices in class, maybe take the first 10 minutes to have them like go over the annotations together, like look for themes, look for questions, and kind of have that as like a starter activity and then launch into it. So like you're kind of using the annotations in class, but they don't have to complete that reading at a specific speed.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, definitely, like I said, my email's on the slides. If there's anything else I can answer for you, if you ever want to set up a time, just to, like talk out some ideas, although it sounds like you have with John and Maggie too. I'm always happy to help, but thanks for having me today for
Thank you.
your PD days.
And we will have lots of people watching the videos. We're having almost as many people watch the videos as
As
we have
attending,
attend.
so.
So,
Oh, that's great. All right.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.